Hello, welcome to The Conversation on New Central Television. This is a program where we bring you up to speed with all the political happenings around the African continent. I am Gbenga Aborowa.
And I am Rita Omodia. Now, today on The Conversation, South Africa's former President Jacob Zuma is not done yet with his prison sentence and may be heading back behind the bars. Now, going by the recent ruling of the country's Supreme Court of Appeal that his release on early medical parole was unlawful. In essence, the court says Zuma should return to prison to finish his sentence for contempt of court.
Also on the program today, we'll be turning our attention to Nigeria, where President Muhammadu Buhari has officially inaugurated the first oil drilling field in northern Nigeria as the country seeks to produce crude outside the Niger Delta for the first time.
A lot of things happen in Nigeria. I mean, for some people, they look at it as a plus. While some other people, they're looking at the past refineries we've had, past oil explorations in Niger Delta going on and how fruitful this will be.
Exactly. And there's also questions. COP27 just ended about developing more fossil fuels when the world is moving towards renewable energy. Is this something we should celebrate or not? But I look forward to discussing with the experts later on.
Definitely. And just before we continue, I don't know, what did you feel about the new Naira design? I mean, it came out today.
I thought it was a poorly designed exercise. If you're going to redesign, it doesn't mean recolor. They could have...
Well, that's part of redesign.
Even universities... Yeah, but they didn't change anything. They just changed the colors, and I thought that was quite tacky. But what do I know? Yeah. So let's get into today's first discussion in South Africa, where a court in the country has ruled that former President Jacob Zuma's release from jail on medical parole was unlawful, ordering him to return to prison to complete his sentence. In July 2021, Zuma was sentenced to 15 months in jail for contempt of court for refusing to testify before a judicial commission investigating corruption during his nearly decade-long presidency. He was released from the Escort Correctional Center on medical parole after just 2 months to serve out the rest of his sentence under house arrest.
However, the Supreme Court of Appeals in its judgment on Monday ruled that the 80-year-old former president was illegally granted parole by Fraser, then head of South Africa's Department of Correctional Services, who made the decision against the advice of the Medical Parole Advisory Board. According to the court, medical experts had considered that Zuma does not meet the required conditions. The decision comes after prison authorities announced last month that Zuma, who has appeared in public several times, dancing and singing to his supporters, would be finishing his sentence. Now, joining us to unpack all this, we have Patrick Kadima, a legal analyst. He joins us all the way from Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you, Rita and Gbenga. Thank you.
Wonderful. So, Patrick, tell us, what has been the reaction to the court ruling that former President Jacob Zuma is to return to jail in South Africa? Now, when we go back to the past when he was given the 15-month sentence for contempt of court, and even the first sentence that he had, there was a lot of disruptions going on in South Africa. Right now, the court saying that the former president should go back to jail. What has been the reaction?
The reaction, I believe, has been a mixed feeling. There are certain quarters that say that the Supreme Court of Appeal, in its judgment, succinctly interpreted the law properly and the relevant legislation. There are some quarters as well that state that the Supreme Court of Appeal did not do justice, and that it is unfair that the former president is sent back to jail. But I mean, all these are mixed reactions from different quarters, of the population, and I mean, it's granted that people are due to feel differently in such a high legal matter that has taken place.
Now, Patrick, former President Zuma was released after serving only a fifth of his sentence. What does the court make of the former head of South Africa's correctional facilities, Fraser's decision to illegally and single-handedly release the former president?
Look, it's first important that we first take the context of what has happened in this instance. So we do know last year the Constitutional Court, which is the apex court in the country, had decided to to sentence the president to jail, and the president began his sentence, I think, 8 July of last year. And when he was there, the president had sought medical advice during his serving time in jail. Just to put context to that, they had sent some doctors to the president, one doctor that was treating the president, who is in fact from the military services. So as a former president, the president's healthcare services are handled by the military services. And the president, one of the doctors that was there, that is stated in the papers, had outlined that the president's health was deteriorating and that he needed specialist care. And therefore, I think also that the president was sent to a Pretoria hospital for treatment, and he had returned back to the correctional facility. But then when when the medical parole board had asked for the opinions of the medical experts or the medical doctors, they got reports from the military health services that had stated that yes, indeed, the president's health had deteriorated. Now, the medical parole board had met twice in August, I think, of when was it? I don't know, of last year, to determine whether the president was due for release. And what had happened is that on those two occasions, it did not have a decision, and it cited insufficient information and wanted more information from independent practitioners. Now, and when they met later, the parole board, the medical parole board, it decided that the president, after considering the factors, did not deserve medical parole board. Then here comes now the commissioner, and the commissioner says that, look, I'm going to grant the former president medical parole because of certain factors. He cites the unrest that had happened. He cites that the president was 79 years old at the time. Mm-hmm. He cites that he is the former president of the country. He also cites that it's the first time in the history of the country that a former president with the constitutional benefits that are accorded to him was sentenced to jail and was sent to a correctional facility. More importantly, he also cites that the correctional facility where the former president was being held did not have the tertiary health care to take care of the former president. Now, and those are some of the factors he considered and decided to release the former president. But then the Supreme Court of Appeal then says that the commissioner did not have those powers, mm-hmm. and that he had interpreted the law essentially wrongly and the legislation wrongly. This is because when the medical parole board refused, the Supreme Court of Appeal in its judgment says that was the end of the matter, and that the commissioner did not have the powers to change what the medical parole board had said. But then the Supreme Court of Appeal then goes on to say that and give context that in 2012, when the medical parole board was set up, it was because as a concern that the commissioner, who had at that time the sole powers to grant medical paroles to any individual, was cause for concern because power could be misused by the commissioner and so on and so forth. And that the medical parole board, a board of experts and of about 10 medical doctors, was a specialist body, and that it would advise the commissioner on decisions or on decisions of medical parole. So yes, indeed, the Supreme Court of Appeal had said that the commissioner did not have those powers, and that the president should return to the correctional service. But just to head on that, in its judgment again, the Supreme Court of Appeal then comes out and says, look, the High Court has also made a mistake. The High Court states that the president, having served time, the time he served outside when he was granted medical parole should not count as time time served in the correctional facility or serving his sentence.
Okay, so what sentence will be remaining for the former president now, Jacob Zuma? Because you're talking about him already serving a full time. Now that he has been called to go back to prison, what's going to be the full sentence? What's the remaining sentence for?
No, yes. So that's the question, the major question now with a lot of people. But the Supreme Court of Appeal outlines it properly, and hence I'm giving that context that states that the Supreme Court of Appeal is stating that the High Court, which had said that the former president did not serve his full sentence by being outside when he was granted that unlawful, as the judgment says, medical parole, was wrong because the High Court did not have the powers to do that. It is the Supreme Court of Appeal gives the term separation of powers. It says the court is encroaching into the other a sphere of separation of powers, which is the executive. And
so, Patrick, having established that, sorry to interrupt you, Patrick, having established that fact from the courts, whose responsibility is it to decide whether the former president, Jacob Zuma, goes back to jail and the duration of his remaining time in jail? Is it the courts or the Department of Correctional Services?
So essentially, the court is saying he must return. But as to whether he has served his time, that is up to the commissioner to decide when he returns.
Okay, but is there a timeline to when President Zuma will be going to jail? And are there still legal avenues for him to appeal this particular judgment?
I think there are still legal avenues for him to appeal this judgment. I don't know when he's going to return. If his lawyers decide to probably appeal it and try to appeal it to the Constitutional Court, I don't know. Probably then that will mean that we'll have to wait and so on and so forth. But we'll all have to wait and see what plays out during this, during this remaining few days and weeks, and hear from his lawyers what should happen from today going onwards.
Now, Patrick, the world witnessed the arson, debt, looting, and destruction that followed the arrest of President Jacob Zuma in July. Do you foresee a breakdown in law and order when President Zuma returns to jail? If he returns to jail?
That is a difficult one to answer because I think there are different schools of thought as to what had transpired last year, you know.
And a commission was also set up to look into those events. Do you think South Africa is better prepared to handle such a situation? Just as a follow-up to that question, my initial question.
Yeah. As to what happened last year during protests, I've heard different schools of thoughts from different legal scholars, from different social scientists as to what led to the rioting. Some state that it was because the former president was sent to jail. Some state that it's maybe because of the high inequality and high unemployment that the country continues to face, like all other African countries, and therefore people had used that as an opportunity to go on and do the looting. Whether the country is ready to or better equipped to deal with such, I don't know. That is that I think is the answer for the relevant government department to answer whether they are better equipped or not, you know, if such a thing happens.
Okay, now let's go back to Arthur Fraser. You mentioned something that the court said his decision was unlawful and unconstitutional. Now, he was then ordered to pay the costs of the applicants. So what exactly should be happening to Arthur Fraser? I mean, he clearly made the decision to release Jacob Zuma, which you also referred to that the court said was unlawful. What is the financial aspect of the judgment and of what is the financial reparation that Arthur Fraser will have for this judgment that he gave?
And is it enough punishment?
In terms of, sorry?
Is it enough punishment for his offense?
Is it an abolishment for?
Punishment for his offense, because the court said it did it illegally.
No, in terms of orders and cost orders, it's up to the court to decide. I mean, looking at the context of the matter that is happening and so on and so forth. And if the court has decided that Arthur Fraser should pay those costs, then I think it was the feeling of the full bench of the Supreme Court of Appeal that got to that decision, given the context that he should pay the costs.
Okay.
So I mean, it's normal that if the first respondent, I mean, the first applicant, the first appellant and the second appellant are ordered to pay the cost of the respondents, it's because they have lost the case.
All right, Patrick, now still on this, I mean, earlier on we saw former President Jacob Zuma, despite talking about his deteriorating health, he came out and talked about the current president, Ramaphosa, and all the corruption allegations leveled against him. Now we have the ANC elections just around the corner. I mean, are you seeing a coincidence with all of this? And how is it going to pan out for Ramaphosa?
So essentially, when the media briefing had happened, I think he was right to do a media briefing, it is his right. I mean, going to the December national conference, there's a lot of, given views depending on the current sitting president, especially with the current scandal that happened at his Palapala farm, that will also have probably an impact on him. Because it's currently on the news, it's top of the agenda, people are talking about it, people are asking a lot of questions about it. And so there are a lot of factors going into the December ANC National Conference. It's obviously probably going to have a dent on the current sitting president, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, but I don't think that it will be something that is probably the Palapala case that's in front, that is something that will probably or have substance to unseat him going into the conference.
Now, finally, before we let you go, Patrick, do you see a constitutional review, or do you see the public protector taking up this case? Because you have a situation, a clear case of abuse of power. There's a medical parole board, and you're supposed to take their recommendations before you make a decision. We saw Arthur Fraser clearly ignored the advice of the medical parole board. We said there are two members of the medical parole board that were both in favor of former President Jacob Zuma remaining behind bars, but Arthur Fraser chose to ignore it. So looking at the legal implication and the rule of law in South Africa, do you see this going further? Do you see the Ministry of Justice taking it up and, perhaps ironing things out? Because you also said that the Constitutional Court said the High Court made a mistake in their judgment, because it's all getting messy at the moment.
So, I don't know, are you asking if the public protector will take up the case?
Yes. With my specifics are Arthur Fraser's abuse of power to prevent such a thing from happening in the future.
No, I don't think the public protector will take up the case, and on what grounds. But if there are grounds that the public protector thinks, legal grounds, that they can take up the case because of Arthur Fraser's misuse of power or unlawful use of power, as the Supreme Court of Appeal states. But what I do think is that this case is ongoing now. I mean, the Supreme Court of Appeal has stated that he unlawfully used this power. So why will the public protector want to take this case on, especially just with Arthur Fraser himself? But I think what's going to happen here is that definitely the former president's lawyers are going to probably seek other legal avenues to challenge what has happened now, and probably appeal it to the apex court, because the Supreme Court of Appeal is the second highest court. But just to mention one thing as well is that in its judgment, the Supreme Court of Appeal ends up rounding off by stating, when it's getting to its conclusion, that it was really sad, and it was not pleased with the Department of Correctional Service media statement that had come out a few months back to state that the former president had finished his sentence and therefore was free. And the Supreme Court of Appeal cites that the Department of Correctional Services knew, and the Commission knew, that such a matter was before the Supreme Court of Appeal, and for them to release such a media statement was undermining the judiciary and so on and so forth. So here we see again an angry Supreme Court of Appeal, stating that it was really not happy with what the Commission and the department had done by releasing that statement. But also we see again the Supreme Court of Appeal stating that the High Court had lost the plot when it had decided to step into the commissioner's shoes and decide whether the president had fulfilled his prison sentence or not, and said that that is not in the ambit of the judiciary, and it's stepping onto the separation of powers.
Okay, thank you very much, Kadima, Patrick, for joining us today on the conversation. We do appreciate your insights on the subject.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and enjoy your evening.